Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources, the podcast where hopefully you are getting a lot of new information, maybe some insights, maybe you feel validated, maybe you're like, I totally disagree with everything they've just said. Either way, hopefully you're getting something out of it. And the beauty is that we have so many amazing guests that come on this show, including my guest for this week, who is James Warren. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun. That's just my prediction for this episode.
I agree.
And I don't think I'm wrong. So let me tell you a little bit about James. He is the founder and CEO of ShareMore Stories, a human experience insights company. The company's primary offering is the Seek platform, which helps organizations and brands uncover the emotional drivers behind employee and customer experiences. James is a researcher, strategist, writer, and facilitator who blends storytelling, AI, and insights to help companies better understand themselves, their customers, and their communities. With nearly 30 years of experience in marketing, insights, strategy, and innovation, he is passionate about the intersections of humanity, technology, brands, communities, and culture. An active community leader, he volunteers on several boards, and he also studied economics and literature at Princeton and creative writing at Columbia, originally from New York, woot woot, although I am from New Jersey, actually quite close to Princeton. But still, I'm a New Yorker now, so woot woot. James now calls Richmond home. And you know what? We've talked a lot about traffic and parking and all of that. And honestly, I can understand why. James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Yes, same here, same here. And especially since you are, a storyteller, and this is such a huge part of, what you do. I'm really excited to hear your own stories. And maybe the first is how you ended up finding yourself in this type of industry, in this type of career, and where kind of your passion around this subject started.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think when I was little, I was always into stories and storytelling, and I've loved writing my whole life. And, those two things from a creative and expressive standpoint have been really a big part of me since I was young. Also, I always wanted to start my own business. So those two things, as disparate as they are, were two very long-term guiding motivations for me. And when I had an opportunity to transition from corporate career to entrepreneurship, I took it. I was like, okay, this is the time. And if I don't do it now, I'll probably never do it and I'll regret it. And so I've tried, like when I was younger, I started businesses as a kid. I started a business in high school, and this was the one that finally took and really stuck, because I think for me personally, coming out of brand management and business development, I could see both good uses of storytelling, but also not so useful uses of storytelling. And I really sensed that we were at a place where deeper connection, deeper human understanding, this sort of move towards experiences, both inside the organization and in the marketplace, like those things were really starting to pick up speed, 10, 15 years ago. And now I think they're at a place where we can make a difference, helping especially leaders in companies and organizations listen differently and then act in a more impactful way. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
I love it. And I'm just reflecting now on your academic accolades. I mean, studying economics and literature at Princeton, it kind of is a way of saying without saying that you use both sides of your brain.
Exactly right.
It's like usually you get like one or the other. You get like someone who's like really into economics and numbers and math and stats, and then you have someone who's into literature and creative writing, which you studied at Columbia, and all these other things. But you're like, nope, I'm going to do both because I can.
I wonder how much, because you get to a point where you have a good sense of your own capabilities, but you still never really know all of it. So you got to have people hold up a mirror. And my teammate, Andy, he's our chief technology officer, and he's almost the opposite. Like, he is such a analytical thinker, a quantitative thinker. He programs, he writes code. And he also his undergrad was in psychology, so he's coming at it from the slightly other way, where he's definitely this person with a little bit of the other side of his brain. And the funny part is, as much as he sees the world in code and shapes, like literally, he also is a brilliant storyteller on his own, and he doesn't think of himself that way, which is hilarious. He's like, stories. And then I'll listen to him the stories, and I'm like, okay, Andy.
You're like, you're so good at this, Andy. Right. What's going on here? What do you mean, stories? Wow. No, that's amazing. I like what you said around, we don't always, sometimes it effectively like takes us a little bit of time to figure out what our true capabilities are. And
Yeah.
um, I had a guest on recently, Scott Schickler, who said that, if you tell a group of people to raise their hands as high as they can raise them, and then you tell them, okay, try a little bit more, like 9 times out of 10, basically, I'm doing a really poor job of quoting him, 9 times out of 10, people are able to lift their arms higher. And
Mm.
that like really resonated with me because, you know, sometimes, and we see this like just in human nature in general, that there is this like nature versus nurture component. I think that people who have these like really solid home lives and they don't have any like housing or food instability. I'm taking this like to a totally different direction, I
Yeah,
realize.
no, I like
But,
it.
like all of this, right? Like they don't necessarily, like, unless someone's saying to them, you can do so much more. Like, oh, you're really good at math. Like, why not go into the sciences? Why not go into the math? Like, you could do so much. These are all the things, all the careers that you can go down. Or you're a really good speaker. Maybe you should think about a career in marketing, communications, or really anything. And I often think about that if, unless we really have the right support system, we don't necessarily know from a young age just how much we can do.
Mm.
And that does also then take me to like what happens to that person in business when they are what they're in a place where they believe they're at their max capability, when maybe they're at 50%, they just don't know it, but they're at their, quote unquote max capability, and they have a leader who sees in them so much more, or they have a leader who sees in them so much less, right? Like you could go either way, but it just like it's really kind of fascinating when you think about how much of our childhood can actually really play a role in our careers.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you're hitting on, I love this. Like revealing some of the hidden truths about ourselves. And I think that's true for the individual. I think it's true for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Because the hidden truths are exactly as you say, they're things about ourselves that maybe we're not recognizing or remembering or realizing. It can be for any number of reasons, from I got too comfortable to
Mm.
it was traumatizing, or some combination. And one of the things that happens when we bring people into our platform, or when we used to like facilitate sessions, and we're asking them to explore a story, it's typically not a surface story. It's very foundational to their belief system or how they work. So we'll ask questions like, tell me about the most memorable experience you've had with X, because that
Mm.
gives them a chance to go high or low, positive or negative, but like what's really sticking with you. And then we like just gently step them in. And next thing you know, they're like, wow, I had no idea that this event or experience was staying with me this way. Or I had no idea that I felt this way about these things because of this experience. So they will start like their own discovery, their own insight into themselves, just participating. And then to your point, the leader's role, like what do you do with that? For the leader, it's such a big question. Are you creating an environment in a community, in a culture where people, I don't always love the expression bring my whole self to work, because I think that assumes that I want to do that, but bring the
True,
level of
true.
self that I want to bring. Like
Mm.
I want there to be norms for sure, but not barriers. Like guardrails, but not barriers. If I get a lot of value out of work, I want to be in a place that lets me express that. And if work is not transactional, but occupies a certain level in my prioritization of needs and wants, then I don't want to be forced to make it more than that. And I think
Mm.
leaders can play a huge role in shaping the culture. They don't. The leader is not the culture, but the leader plays a significant outsized role in shaping the culture, because
Hmm.
especially for the negative, when the leader is doing bad things, you see them almost instantly in the
Hmm.
culture. And I think,
Hmm.
like they say, it's harder to build trust than it is to lose it. I think a little bit of that's true on the culture side too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, when someone contributes negatively to a culture or contributes to the breakdown of culture, it you might as well take 5 steps back
Yes,
for every one step forward that good behaviors can
totally.
take, can in terms of moving cultures forward. And it's really true. I mean, I think that if everyone even just takes a moment to think about the negative behaviors that stand out to them, even just from today or
Yeah,
this week or
yeah,
whatever that looks like, I could probably come up with five,
yeah.
10, maybe, that I've seen from leaders who maybe are totally well intentioned, but don't necessarily understand their impact. And I actually was recently speaking with someone who will be a guest on the podcast later in 2026. Um, and she asked me, like, why do you think leaders don't do more? Or like, why do they not see this potential for impact, basically? And I said, well, I think two ways. I think skeptically and I think optimistically. And that's just how I balance, my brain. And the skeptic in me says, well, they don't care.
Hmm.
But the optimist in me, which generally is more of the overarching theme in terms of my personality, is that they just don't know. They don't understand. There's something that they haven't learned yet. That when they say, hey, thank you so much, Traci, for working while you were sick and you weren't with your kids at their bedtime like you like to do. And we really appreciate all the sacrifice that you made. They could think, this didn't happen to me, but just saying, as an example, this could be someone thinking, wow, that like, I really appreciate that Traci just went so above and
Yeah.
beyond, and I want to recognize her for that. But really, what that does is say, hey, this is how you get somewhere. You have to work when you're sick. You can't spend time with your kids, and you have to sacrifice the things that matter to you most in order to get somewhere. And this is where I think sometimes if leaders don't see that they are in a fishbowl and they are being looked at with such a magnifying glass that every small thing, every big
Yes.
thing is going to be amplified. And for good reason, I think, but especially the negative things, they are just so apparent. And sometimes it's as simple as that they think that they're recognizing someone when really they're actually rewarding behaviors that that companies really don't benefit from.
Well, I love that example because what you're really getting at in my mind is what drives trust, and this idea that in most people in their work experience, they have both a conscious and a subconscious recognition of where the power is in that relationship. They kind of know, like, yeah, I work here and I'm my own human. I have agency. I can decide not to work here tomorrow. But the power at the most fundamental level is most people need their jobs, right? So if you need your job, there's a level of power that your employer has. That's not
Yeah.
good or bad. It just is because
Mm-hmm.
you theoretically need them more than they need you. So that fundamental imbalance that is like pure just economic then says, hey, so a leader that either consciously or unconsciously does things that remind me of their power or
Mm,
extend their power or maybe make me feel like I have less power than I actually do, those things really take on outsized impacts on the employee because they're already feeling that stress or pressure or strain. And, again, whether this job is everything to them or just a part of what matters to them, most employees on average want to do a good job and they don't want to have to worry about the fear of losing their job. And I
right.
think in our current, maybe not so current, our environment over the last number of decades, that fundamental contractor relationship has obviously changed because, layoffs are a quarterly reality for almost every industry and many, many companies. Companies
Mm-hmm.
in industries that were never touched now have to experience this. And I kind of zoom out and I say, well, all of that is the big picture change context that organizations, leaders, and associates find themselves in. The environment is changing, tech is changing, how consumers interact with brands are changing. All that puts a
Mm-hmm.
lot of external pressure on the company, on the business, on the brand. So now they have to start making decisions that leaders from 25 years ago didn't have to make. And they have to make them in a context that is changing by the day. That leaders 25 years ago, they had their own set of problems, to be clear, but they're
Right.
different. And so now you have this sort of storm happening inside culture in the workplace that is trying to figure out how do we fit with what's going on in the external environment. And I think some of the answer is you may not be able to. You might just have to say the old rules apply less and less every day. I've got to come up with a new way of understanding where my employees are at, what really matters to them, and also how am I showing up to your original point? Like, what is my impact on them as much as what is their own experience, regardless of the role I'm playing in? I think both of those are really important for leaders today.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And sometimes when I interact with newer leaders, inevitably there's a lot of unknown, or a lot of just lack of experience for people who have never led teams before, whether it's one person or
Yeah.
multiple. And on top of that unknown, I think there's also all of this pressure that people feel to go from being a successful individual contributor to a hyper successful leader.
Yeah.
And then you also have this reality where sometimes companies don't actually prepare people to become leaders, either before they become leaders or even while they're leaders. And so then you throw these people who have no idea what's going on. They just, they're replicating what leaders before them that they have reported into, or their current leaders, what they have seen. And you hope that they've had good examples. Sometimes they've not had good examples. And so then, what exactly are they emulating? What exactly are they replicating? And I think this is where, in kind of reflecting on some even more recent conversations I've had with leaders, there's an element to this, like from an HR standpoint, where I really encourage people, leaders and HR partners to these leaders, that they just take a step back and remember that their job has changed. Like, they have their own job that they're doing, because gone are the days where you're just managing people and you don't have like a different job. Like, you are doing the job that you were probably kind of doing before, maybe with larger scope, and you're leading people. So your day looks different, your week, month, quarter looks different. And you have to, in a way, just like drop the ego a little bit. Like, it's okay if you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
You are going to make mistakes, and it's okay if you don't, rise to the occasion right away. Like, there's a lot to learn. Sometimes you have the situation where someone goes from being a peer to then leading that particular person or friend, or, in that case, the peer. And there are so many dynamics to think about. And I think ego tends to be the thing that stands in a lot of people's way. And we see this at every level of leadership. Certainly, sometimes the higher you go, you see it a little bit more. But I think that people would generally be best suited to just remember that they are humans at the end of the day, and they're leading humans, and making mistakes and asking for help, and all of those things don't stop just because you've become someone that leads other people.
I mean, you're talking to me about human-centered leadership, human-centered brands, human-centered product experiences, because for both a very recent reason, I think human-centered is going to become more and more valuable as we live in a sea
Agreed.
of made-up AI-driven slop. It's like,
Yeah.
finding the real is going to be more and more important. At a minimum, just so I know if I'm dealing and interacting with a real human. And one of the things that I was just having this conversation with somebody else, one of the things that is a real indicator of humanity is the capacity to make mistakes. And, granted, a lot of our AI experiences today are totally mistake ridden. I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
but the intention is for them to be perfect and flawless. And I don't want perfect and flawless in everything. I definitely want my car to run smoothly, almost flawlessly
For
all
sure.
the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I want humans to retain some of this essential humanness of, I might make a mistake. I want to see tears. I want to feel tears. I want to feel joy. I want these things that only almost exist in relationship to each other. I can't have absolute joy all the time, because it literally loses its meaning if I have no idea what the absence of joy is. And that's a human experience. So when you start talking about humans who lead other humans, I think some people say, well, why does that matter? Generally it's like, okay, do we have to break this down? It's because we're human. That's why it matters to be human. But I get it. Some people want to understand, like, well, how do I, emphasize this or lean into it? It goes back to differentiators. You want to be a place where people put at the top of their list to work. You want to be a brand that people put at the top of their list to buy. Even an aspirational brand, or an aspirational, like, you want to be the leader that people inside the company, like, I hope I get to work for them one day. So that aspiration creates differentiation. If you are a place that people aspire to be part of or be in relationship with, you have a differentiator over the competition, whether that's other places they could go work or other places they could buy from. And that, to me, is the practical side. But I think the more human-centric side is, what would it look like if you do the thought experiment in reverse? What would it look like to strip away all of our humanity? Then we're like literally living the Matrix, and I really don't want that. I'm
No,
not going
same.
to put a jack in the back of my head and be like, manufacture
Right.
energy for the bots. Like, I don't want to do that.
Totally. I'm with you. I co-sign that. Yeah, it's this is what makes being a human so awesome. Take that AI, take that
Yeah.
computers. No offense to the
Yeah.
recording studio that we are using right now, which is totally AI powered. But seriously, I mean, it's what makes being human, working with humans, leading humans so fabulous. And that, of course, it's not easy. And with human nature comes all of the ups and downs. But there is, this propensity for flaws is totally okay. And actually, I think when we even just put into perspective that companies, in order to progress, in order to be future stable, whatever
Yeah.
that might mean, or future ready, they have to innovate. And you literally cannot innovate without making mistakes. There is just no possible way
Totally.
of doing that. AI
Totally.
makes mistakes, as you said, all the time. Most people are not reading through things to
Listen,
catch the
that's
mistakes.
a whole episode because I'm
I
like,
know.
people, this is not in
Critical
the hard
thinking,
bucket.
due diligence, right? Totally. Totally. No, it's I think if we I don't know, maybe sometimes the word mistakes throws people off because they people are so, I mean, I certainly can feel this way as someone who can be very type A, or is very, let me be honest, I'm very type A. I can't, it's not that I can be, it's that I am. Um and part of that is like you have to have things a certain way. You want to get things done 100%. You want to build Rome. You don't want to just build, the door to the city. And half of that, I think, is that like saying that a mistake was made is like, oh my gosh, I failed. But actually, to your point, how do you know success without it? How do you know achievement without, hitting some bumps in the road and having to navigate roadblocks or coming up against people who maybe even work against you, right?
I love this. You're hitting on some of the things that we actually measure in
Oh,
employee experience because
cool.
when we did a lot of our work lately has been on the employee side. It's definitely been focusing on things like belonging and trust and leadership impact. And we did a small pilot recently with a group of like citywide community leaders. And we asked them to describe experiences where they felt like they belonged. Because the premise was if you're a leader in this organization or region or company, you have an obligation to create that belonging space for the people under your responsibility. But to get there, it's like, let's start with you. Let's get you vulnerable. Let's get you open. And one of the things that stood out in one of these sort of experiential pathways towards belonging was challenge and adversity, not separate from belonging, but as one of the ways, like if I can experience a challenge, if I can navigate adversity, if I can make that mistake or fail and experience what it's like to learn from that, that is one of the most powerful frames for a person to feel like they belong in that particular environment.
Mm.
And I hadn't heard that one that clearly before, but it showed up as a major theme. And then I started thinking, well, let's look at this group of people. They're generally high achievers, not so much socioeconomically, because that was very, very diverse, but they're all
Mm.
leading things and doing things in a groundbreaking or innovative or striving kind of way. They're either leading private sector, public sector, or nonprofit sector. And so when you zoom out, you're like, well, that's interesting because they almost wouldn't know what it means to belong in any place if they had not been able to fail or try something hard in some of those places.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that some of them said that's when I experienced belonging because I was able to do that and grow from it or learn from it was really, really interesting to me because, like you said, we so see mistakes and failures as deeply, deeply negative. And we've all heard by now, failure is not, it's part of the innovation pathway, it's part of growth. And it all sounds great when we're telling other people. But when we got to tell ourselves, like,
Totally.
damn, I just failed. And like, who wants to say that?
Yeah,
I mean,
totally
I have
sucks.
a funny story about it. If we have time, I'll tell you later about failing and the whole process of it.
I would love to hear it. Yeah, I mean, that, I think I might have even said this before on my podcast probably a year or so ago, because I can't remember it well enough. So it has to be over a year ago. If it's any less than that, we've got problems.
There's nothing. It was
Um,
nothing you said last week. Not at all.
no, no, I
Positive.
hope not. I hope not. And it was that, sometimes people will say, like, whether it's a job interview or someone asking a question, like, what's your biggest failure? And I struggle to answer that, not because I've not failed. I've obviously had failure in my life. I think because part of me is like, you know, oh my gosh, failure is not who I am. Right. And like a lot of us probably think that way. And so having been asked that question, like however many times throughout my life, I've almost had to confront within myself that
Yeah.
failure is part of how I got to where I am today. And so, to your point, there is such a deeply negative reaction to that. And I think, kind of coming back to this initial kind of discussion that we had around what leaders and organizations are rewarding or how they're kind of creating some of these uh, environments where this is either welcomed and there's safety, psychological or otherwise, where you can make mistakes and you can fail and learn from them, or the opposite. I think that this is where having a leader who's like, oh, you made a mistake? That's cool. It's all right. What did you learn from it? What are we going to do differently next time? How are we going to grow? You might make the mistake again, but how are you going to try not to? And I think that's where you end up cultivating a team that is going to innovate more. They're going to make more mistakes. They're going to succeed more because of it, because they're going to not be afraid to say, "Hey, you know what? I made a mistake, or I messed up on this, or I missed this," and maybe it's a big deal, maybe it's not, but at least then you as a leader or that leader in that particular circumstance can help that person navigate the mistake, can guide them toward a different path for better success in the future. And I think that is probably one of the biggest opportunities that most organizations have, is how they navigate failure, mistakes, lack of success, whatever that might be.
I love that idea. I mean, I wish we could do a project like that right now, because I think there's so much to learn from the failure experience, from the mistake experience. But I also think there's like, you already hit some of the relationships. You know, what is that? How does that relate to growth or success, or innovation even? And to your point in the beginning, the leader either has a going in set of beliefs and assumptions that if they don't make clear and transparent, that's part of when it shows up. Like the leaders assuming everybody will do it this way, and they don't do it that way, and there's a negative consequence. And most of the environments people find themselves in has a risk reward dynamic. It also has a success failure dynamic. It's very binary. So it's like, But I have found in my own experience and others, the more a leader fosters, as an example, a culture of experimentation, they are teaching people how to make maybe smaller bets, but more often. So you're reducing the aggregate risk because you're teaching people how to do well, let's experiment on just this little thing.
I love that.
That teaches me like the habits of, well, why was it a good experiment? Because I didn't risk it all up front. I tried to figure out what I didn't know and at least bring some people around to help me start closing those gaps. And we had something that we could actually test and measure. So it immediately changes the conversation from even failure to experimentation, because now the data is the data. The data is teaching us whatever we learn. We are learning from the experience of experimentation. But it takes a leader willing to say, hey, outside pressures, I know you want a result like this by X amount of time. There's probably no way to get that result from where we are today without experimenting our way there. So I need you all to stay out here so I can give my team the safe space they need to experiment. And that takes an deeply emotionally intelligent leader who's willing to create that kind of culture and take some of the hits if they're in a place where that's not the norm, if they're trying to build a little new culture along the way.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I feel like that is like probably a totally separate episode on its own. And I can't even believe how much time has already passed, because I feel like I need a lot more time to break down even more. I mean, this was such an amazing discussion. And I really like all of the perspectives that you shared, and how you see these opportunities and from both the emotional intelligence standpoint and the employee experience standpoint. And I would love for you to share with the listeners where they can connect with you, learn more, and potentially even get in touch with ShareMore Stories, your company.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. It's been a great conversation. I love spending time on LinkedIn, so you can find me at James-Warren-Seek. That's SEEQ. That's my profile, or you can go to our website, sharemorestories.com, and right there you can learn from the homepage about how we do this kind of work with employees and organizations. A little bit about how we got here, because it's not a straight line.
Never.
But yeah, I would love for people to get in touch if there's something they just want to talk about and rap about. It'd be cool.
Totally. This has been so fun. I would love to have you back on the podcast.
Absolutely.
There's always more to talk about. And it's really been such a pleasure, James. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.